Episode 1, The Dogs of Night. Episode 1, The Dogs of Night. Bellmont Plantation, South Carolina Lowcountry, September 1857. The moon hung thin and mean over the rice fields, offering barely enough light to distinguish earth from sky. Thomas crouched behind the cooper's shed, his heart hammering so hard he feared it might give him away. 23 years he'd lived in bondage on Bellmont Plantation, and tonight, this very night, he would taste freedom or die trying. He'd chosen his moment carefully. The autumn harvest was in full swing, and the white folks were exhausted from their annual ball in Charleston. Colonel Bellmont had returned only 2 hours ago, and Thomas had watched from the quarters as the overseer, Silas Crow, stumbled toward his cabin with a bottle still in hand. The patrols wouldn't expect anyone fool enough to run during harvest time, when every enslaved soul was accounted for twice daily. Thomas clutched the small bundle he'd prepared over weeks, a piece of salt pork stolen in tiny increments, a tin cup, a spare shirt. His feet were already wrapped in rags to muffle his footfalls and confuse the dogs when they came. And they would come. They always did. He waited until the last lamp in the overseer's cabin went dark, then moved. The first 100 yards were agony. Every snap of a twig beneath his feet sounded like a gunshot. Every breath seemed to echo across the silent plantation. He skirted the edge of the rice fields, staying low, moving toward the tree line that bordered the old Charleston road. If he could make it to the river, 3 miles north, he could follow it upstream, keeping to the water to throw off the scent. The night air was thick and humid, pressing against his skin like a hot cloth. Mosquitoes whined around his ears, but he didn't dare slap at them. In the distance, a hound barked once, then fell silent. Thomas froze, his pulse roaring in his ears. Nothing. Just a dog dreaming. He moved again, faster now, confidence building with each step that took him farther from the slave quarters. The tree line was close, 50 yards, 40, 30. Freedom was measured in footsteps, and each one felt like a prayer answered. Then he heard it, the crack of a twig behind him. Not his own footfall. Someone else. Thomas spun, his eyes straining in the darkness. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows near the equipment barn. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the casual confidence of a man who knew he'd already won. Well, well. Silas Crow's voice was thick with whiskey, but steady enough. Thought you was clever, didn't you, Thomas? The overseer stepped into the thin moonlight, and Thomas saw the coiled whip hanging from his belt. The pistol tucked into his waistband. Behind Crow, 2 more shapes materialized. Patrollers, poor whites who earned their living hunting runaways for the bounty. I wasn't running, Mr. Crow, sir, Thomas said, the lie automatic, desperate. I was just... Shut your lying mouth. Crow spat into the dirt. You think I'm stupid? Think I don't know every trick you people try? Thomas's mind raced. The tree line was still 20 yards away. If he ran, if he could just reach the trees... He bolted. Behind him, Crow shouted, and Thomas heard the whistle, the signal. Within seconds, the night exploded with sound. Dogs baying, men yelling, the thunder of boots on hard-packed earth. Thomas ran harder than he'd ever run in his life, his lungs burning, legs pumping. The trees were close, so close. Something hit him from behind with the force of a charging bull. He went down hard, face first into the dirt, the air driven from his lungs. Before he could recover, rough hands grabbed his arms, wrenching them behind his back. A knee pressed into his spine, grinding him into the earth. Got him! One of the patrollers crowed. Didn't get far, did he? Crow walked up slowly, deliberately, his boots appearing in Thomas's limited field of vision. The overseer crouched down, grabbed a fistful of Thomas's hair, and yanked his head back. You made me chase you, Crow said softly. That was a mistake. The first blow from the whip handle caught Thomas across the face, splitting his lip. The second cracked against his ribs. He tried to curl into himself, to protect his vital organs, but the patrollers held him fast. Please, Thomas gasped. Please, I'm sorry. Oh, you're sorry now. Crow stood, uncoiling the whip. You'll be sorrier. The whip sang through the air. Hannah stood at the window of the second-floor hallway, her dark hands pressed against the cool glass. From here, she could see the commotion down by the quarters, torches bobbing in the darkness, voices carrying on the night air. Another runner caught. She didn't know who, but she knew what came next. She'd been in the Bellmont house for 8 years, ever since Mrs. Constance had decided she needed a lady's maid who was refined enough for her station. Hannah had learned to move silently through these halls, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to make herself invisible when necessary. She'd also learned to listen, to remember, to gather information that might someday prove useful. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. "Can't sleep either?" Hannah turned to find Isaiah standing in the shadows of the hallway. He was still in his field clothes, rough cotton trousers and a shirt stained with the day's labor. He shouldn't be in the house at this hour, but Isaiah had a way of moving unseen when he needed to. "Someone ran," Hannah said quietly. "I know." Isaiah moved to stand beside her at the window. "Thomas from the cooperage. Fool picked the worst possible night." "Is there ever a good night?" Isaiah was silent for a moment. At 32, he was one of the oldest field hands on the plantation, his body lean and hardened from years of brutal labor. But his eyes held something different from the other enslaved men, a sharp intelligence that he carefully concealed from the white folks. Hannah knew his secret, had known it for over a year now. Isaiah could read. How he'd learned, he'd never fully explained. But she'd discovered him one night in the abandoned tack room, reading by candlelight from a tattered copy of the Charleston Mercury someone had discarded. Since then, they'd met in secret, and Isaiah had begun teaching her. It was dangerous, illegal, punishable by whipping or worse. But Hannah had seized the opportunity like a drowning woman grabbing a rope. "They're bringing him back," Isaiah said, nodding toward the approaching torches. They watched in silence as the group emerged into the clearing between the quarters and the big house. Thomas was on his feet, barely, supported roughly by the 2 patrollers. Even from this distance, Hannah could see the blood on his face, the way he stumbled. Silas Crow walked behind them, coiling his whip with evident satisfaction. "He'll make an example of him," Hannah whispered. "In the morning, he'll call everyone to watch." "I know." "Isaiah," she turned to face him fully. "When are we going?" His jaw tightened. They'd been planning for 2 years, carefully, meticulously, gathering supplies and information, identifying who could be trusted. 7 of them would go when the time came, 7 souls risking everything for a chance at freedom. "Not yet," Isaiah said. "We're not ready. We need. We'll never be completely ready." Hannah's voice was urgent but still quiet. "Every day we wait is another day something could go wrong. Another day someone could be sold away, or we could end up like Thomas down there." Isaiah's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Dead or wishing we were. Hannah, I know you're scared. I am too. But if we move too soon, if we haven't thought through every detail, we won't make it 10 miles. And then everything we've worked for, everything we've risked, it'll all be for nothing." Hannah wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Isaiah had been studying the routes, memorizing the locations of safe houses he'd learned about through the whisper network that connected plantations across the South. He'd been teaching her to read the stars, to identify which plants were edible, to understand the coded songs that would guide them north. Still, watching Thomas being dragged back to his quarters, knowing what awaited him in the morning, made her chest tight with fear and frustration. "How much longer?" she asked. 2 months, maybe 3. We need to wait until after the harvest is completely in. That's when they'll be less vigilant, when we'll have the best chance." He reached out, his fingers briefly touching hers, a moment of connection they couldn't afford to be seen. "I promise you, Hannah, we're going to make it out of here, all of us." Footsteps sounded on the main staircase. Heavy, male, moving with authority. Isaiah melted back into the shadows, disappearing down the servants' stairs before Colonel Bellmont could round the corner. Hannah quickly adopted the posture of a servant waiting for instructions, her eyes downcast. "Hannah?" The colonel's voice was gruff with sleep and irritation. "What's all that commotion outside?" "I believe they caught a runaway, sir," Hannah said respectfully. "Mr. Crow is handling it." Colonel Thaddeus Bellmont moved to the window, his sleeping gown billowing slightly as he walked. At 58, he carried himself with the bearing of a man accustomed to authority. His silver hair was disheveled from sleep, but his face held the same stern expression he wore during the day. "Damn fools," he muttered, watching the scene below. Don't they understand how good they have it here? I don't work them near as hard as Rutledge works his people, or Hampton. They're fed, clothed, given Christian instruction, and still they run." Hannah said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. "Who was it?" Bellmont asked. "Thomas, sir, the cooper." "Thomas?" The colonel shook his head. "I paid good money for him 3 years ago. Thought he had sense. Well, Crow will teach him the error of his ways." He turned from the window. "Go back to bed, Hannah. Mrs. Bellmont will need you fresh in the morning." "Yes, sir." Hannah waited until the colonel had returned to his chambers before allowing herself to breathe fully again. She looked once more out the window, where the torches were disappearing back toward the quarters, and thought of Isaiah's promise. 2 months, maybe 3. She prayed they'd all survive that long. The quarters. Isaiah made it back to his cabin without being seen, slipping through the door into the darkness where 6 other people waited. They'd all heard the commotion, had all understood what it meant. "Thomas?" Moses asked. The blacksmith was a mountain of a man, his hands scarred from years at the forge. At 41, he was the oldest of their group. "Caught," Isaiah confirmed, "not half a mile from the quarters." A sharp intake of breath came from the corner where Abigail sat with her daughter Ruth in her lap. The child was only 4, too young to understand the full weight of what they were planning, but old enough to sense her mother's fear. "They'll whip him public," said Mercy, the elderly woman whose knowledge of healing herbs had saved more than one life in the quarters. At 67, she was taking the greatest risk of all. Her body might not survive the journey north. But she'd told Isaiah plainly she'd rather die free than live one more year in chains. "In the morning," Isaiah confirmed. "We'll all be required to watch." "Good," said Samuel, though his voice was bitter. The 16-year-old had the lean, wiry build of youth, but his eyes held an old anger. "Let everyone see what happens when you run unprepared. Maybe it'll remind folks why we've been planning so careful." His sister Elijah, 14, pressed closer to him. The two were inseparable, had been since their mother was sold to a plantation in Georgia 2 years ago. They'd sworn they'd never be separated again. "Thomas was brave," Elijah said softly. "Thomas was desperate." Isaiah corrected gently. "And desperation makes you reckless. That's why we can't move until we're ready, until we have every detail worked out." "How long?" Abigail asked, her arms tightening around Ruth. 2 months, 3 at most, after the harvest." Moses nodded slowly. "The days are getting shorter. That'll give us more darkness to travel by. And the rivers will be lower," Mercy added, "easier to cross." They'd had this conversation dozens of times, always in whispers, always with someone posted outside to watch for patrollers. Each of them had memorized their roles, the supplies they needed to gather, the signals they'd use. Isaiah had drawn maps in the dirt and smoothed them away, had taught them all the first verse of "Follow the Drinking Gourd," the song that would guide them to the first safe house. But tonight, with the sounds of Thomas's capture still echoing in their ears, the reality of what they were planning felt more immediate than ever. "We're going to make it," Isaiah said, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "We're going to be free, but we have to be smart. We have to be patient. Can everyone here do that?" One by one, they nodded. As the group dispersed back to their own cabins, Hannah appeared in the doorway. Isaiah had known she'd come. They shared one final look, a promise, a prayer, a dream of a future where they could walk together in daylight, married under law, their children born free. Then she was gone, and Isaiah was alone with his thoughts and the distant sound of Thomas weeping in the punishment cell. 2 months, he told himself, just 2 more months. He lay down on his corn-shuck mattress and stared at the ceiling, listening to the night sounds of the plantation. Crickets singing, a baby crying in a nearby cabin, the hoot of an owl hunting in the rice fields. Somewhere out there, north of here, was freedom. It was real, it existed, and Isaiah had read about it in newspapers, in discarded letters, in the secret abolitionist pamphlets that sometimes made their way south. Canada. A place where the law said you were human, not property, where you could own land, raise your children, live without fear. They would reach it, all 7 of them. They had to, because the alternative, spending the rest of his life as Colonel Bellmont's property, watching the people he loved be broken by this system, was not something Isaiah could accept. Outside, the thin moon set, and the darkest part of night settled over Bellmont Plantation like a shroud. Somewhere in the punishment cell, Thomas screamed. And in 7 different cabins, 7 people lay awake, dreaming of freedom and praying for the courage to seize it. Dawn. The bell rang at first light, as it always did. Within minutes, the enslaved population of Bellmont Plantation assembled in the yard between the quarters and the big house. 150 souls, from infants to the elderly, all standing in the cool morning air, all knowing what was coming. Silas Crow stood on the raised platform used for auctions and announcements, his face showing satisfaction despite the early hour. Beside him, 2 patrollers held Thomas upright. The cooper's face was swollen, his shirt torn and bloody. Isaiah stood with the other field hands, forcing his face into the blank mask he'd perfected over years of survival. Beside him, Moses stood equally still. Across the yard, near the house servants, Hannah kept her eyes down. "Let this be a lesson," Crow announced, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "To anyone who thinks about running, this is what happens. This is what always happens." He nodded to the patrollers, who forced Thomas to his knees and tore away what remained of his shirt. The whip cracked. Isaiah didn't look away. None of them could. They were required to watch, to learn the lesson being taught. But inside his mind, he was counting. Counting the days until they would leave this place forever. Counting the miles to freedom. Counting the reasons why this risk, this desperate gamble, was worth taking. The whip cracked again, and Isaiah made himself a promise. When they ran, they would not be caught. They would not end up like Thomas, broken and bleeding in the dirt. They would make it, or they would die trying. Because anything at all, was better than this.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.